Good evening, welcome to another Hot Topic where we discuss the issues affecting East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire. Does North East Lincolnshire really need more housing? Recent figures suggest that at least 3,259 new properties could potentially be built in the area. North East Lincolnshire has seen a surge in development proposals in recent months. The council is not expected to publish its updated local plan until 2017, but insists it is taking a responsible approach on formulating the plan. The government has stated that it wants to build 1 million more homes nationally over the next 4 years to deal with housing shortages. However, new housing developments pose a threat to villages and rural communities, and new houses are not always sustainable. There are further issues about building on floodplains. I'll be discussing this tonight with my guests, the Conservative Councillor for the Waltham Ward on North East Lincolnshire Council and the Conservative Leader on the Council, Philip Jackson, and Chris Carr, the Joint Managing Director at Carr & Carr Builders in Cleethorpes. Welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Riches. Before we start the discussion, here's what the people of Grimsby had to say on whether there is enough affordable housing.
Yes, well, I think there is, but I'm selling mine at the moment.
I'm not sure. There probably is. It's whether people can afford it. I don't know.
No, definitely not. I don't think there's affordable housing anywhere for youngsters now. I think they're very unfortunate. And I don't think the government's doing anything to help.
Maybe a different option as well, like maybe new houses but smaller. I was looking at houses and apartments that were too big for just myself, and I was just thinking no. And then the £1,000 comes and you think I can't do it, because then you've got to buy furniture and people don't understand this.
Not a chance. Private landlords, you're talking like £115, £120 a week. For single parents like me, it's not good enough.
Well, who'd have thought it? Everybody wants to buy their house for less and sell their house for more. How remarkable. Philip, if I could start with you. We've been waiting for this local plan for several years now, really, and we're not going to get it until 2017. What's the hold-up?
Yes, I mean, you're right, there has been an unacceptable delay in the production of a new local plan. Work on it was started far too late, but with pressure from government and from the Conservative opposition on the council, we have managed to bring the date forward when we will have a final new local plan in place. Unfortunately, there's a statutory process that has to be gone through with the local plan in terms of formulation, evidence and public consultation, and without that it's unlikely that it would get government approval. So it's probably progressing as quickly as it can now.
When did it start though? When did this process of planning start for this imminent local plan?
Well, it probably only started in earnest about 2 or 3 years ago, and really we could have started sooner than that.
But is 5 years then, say, 4 or 5 years the normal length of time you'd expect from a plan like this?
Probably yes, but I mean certain measures have been introduced by the government recently to allow local authorities to accelerate local plans, so hopefully it will be brought in now by the middle of 2017.
Chris, as a builder, what do you want to see in the plan?
Well, we want to see a robust plan. We want to see it deliver sustainable sites in the areas where people want to live.
Presumably you want to be selling a few houses, you want to be developing.
Well, we will only build where there is a place to sell. So we're driven by the market. We don't pick a site and go for development. We look at where people want to live, people want to school in, and build in those areas.
Philip, just as a matter of principle, would you say that people should be allowed to build where people want to live? If there's a market demand for housing in a certain place, is that a good enough reason to build there?
Well, generally speaking, I think we should try and fit in with people's desires as to where they want to live. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can just allow houses to be built anywhere. And I think certainly in the centre of Grimsby and Cleethorpes, we've got quite a number of derelict brownfield sites where we'd like to be able to direct more housing, to encourage more housing to be built, because that's going to help with regeneration of the town centres. Otherwise, we're going to end up with this donut effect, which a number of people have mentioned recently, where we've got all the development around the boundary, around the rural boundary of North East Lincolnshire, and very little happening in the middle. But I'm sure, as Chris will say, there are all sorts of financial issues and problems around redeveloping brownfield sites.
Well, what are those issues? Because I mean, the centre of Grimsby, Grimsby is a magnificent town. It's a brave and kindly town, but nobody's ever going to confuse it with Prague or Florence. It is not a place of beauty. People don't necessarily want to live in those brownfield sites in the middle of town.
No, you're correct, but I mean, the council with Coafley are regenerating the centre of Grimsby. I mean, if you'd have said to me 2 years ago we'd have 2 new hotels in the centre of Grimsby, I'd have laughed. But we have 2 hotels. We've got Wilkin Chapman having their new offices built on Cartergate. You know, there's a lot of regeneration going on, and when you make a place a desirable place to live, socialise, then we will build houses there.
Hotels, people coming in and staying temporarily, and a bunch of lawyers. Philip, is that enough?
Well, no. I mean, we need a much more diverse local economy and a much more regeneration in the town centre. But certainly building on the various brownfield sites would help with that. And of course, houses on those sort of sites in the town centre are very sustainable in that people can access local services very easily without having to use cars necessarily. They can walk or use public transport, which is also very beneficial to the local environment.
I mean, you're probably more sensitive to the market and to demand. Is there demand for central Grimsby housing?
No, not at the moment. But this is where the regeneration comes. We can't regenerate an area as a developer. We can rely on the council and we can assist the council. But the regeneration is going on. And as soon as that happens, then, you know, town centres have always been very popular for the young and the elderly. It's one that, you know, there's always been a desire for the McCarthy Stone type developments in the centre of Grimsby and the centre of other towns. Philip's completely right. We've got to regenerate Grimsby. We cannot have the donut effect, which, with great respect, has happened to Scunthorpe. Having the out-of-town retail departments actually killed the centre of Scunthorpe. We're lucky in the moment we haven't had that problem yet, but if we don't do something very soon, we will have that problem.
Well, the Conservative government has recently given the council £125,000 towards what are called housing zones, specifically targeted at regenerating 3 brownfield sites, 2 in Grimsby, 1 in Cleethorpes, and that allows the council to introduce what are called local development orders, which very much simplifies the planning process on those sites and reduces the risk for developers. And the evidence so far seems to be that that's encouraging more interest in those sites. So we're hoping that will bring about greater interest in redevelopment on them.
But how do you spend this money? You get money from central government, there's local money as well. We talk about redevelopment blithely. What literally does that mean? I mean, does that mean laying on better plumbing, better electricity supplies, cleaning up the fronts of houses, doing up front gardens? I mean, what is redevelopment? The buildings are already there. Some of them are a bit scruffy, but is it just a matter of redecorating?
The monies that Philip's talking about is the LDO funds is actually to encourage planning for these sites. Nothing to do with actually developing them out. It's purely to get the planning through, to get the infrastructure sorted out. It's nothing to do with actually physically building the houses. We still have 1,000 empty void homes in North East Lincolnshire. And even as a developer of new houses, I understand that we need to do something to bring those properties back to life again. This is the areas, if we don't do something soon, will become the sink areas which the government are talking about now redeveloping. We need to make sure we can start doing, as well as new homes in the centre of Grimsby, to actually take on the empty voids and do something with those.
I mean, Chris is absolutely right on that, because you know, we have got a couple of thousand empty properties in Grimsby and Cleethorpes now, with all the problems that they can bring. Some of them are only empty for relatively short periods of time, but some of them have been empty for a long time. And it's been a frequent subject of discussion at council meetings on the regeneration scrutiny panel, and nobody really seems to have an answer for that at the moment. And part of the problem is, of course, the relatively low property prices in the centre of Grimsby, which makes redevelopment of those properties, improvement of those properties, less financially viable.
But in some ways that's a two-edged sword, isn't it? The relatively low property prices, because that means that the houses, just by market economics, are more desirable, especially, for instance, for first-time buyers, first-time family buyers. And Chris, I know you said the young and old tend to gather in the centre, and it's the families that might go and take part in that donut effect that you were talking about. And the fact that they're there for the social life is an extremely cheerful fact, if that's what why they're gathering there. But that low property price means that that's a more attractive place to move into, does it not?
It depends, because we are a low-cost area. We have been all over North East Lincolnshire, even in the villages of Waltham and New Waltham and Humberston. These are still fairly low-cost areas. So where you would expect to spend £150,000 to £200,000, that would get you nothing in one of the big cities. That will get you a detached house in one of those villages. So the centre of town, yes, has got very, very low-cost housing, but it's still a starter. But we say we need the monies, and possibly from the Section 106 contributions which we make as developers, we have to put into social housing. 20% of new homes have to be social housing. Do we just not put that money into regenerating some of these some of the areas that need a lot more regeneration work?
Within the centre of the town rather
Within
than
the
edges
centre,
of the town.
yes.
Just for the record, I think about the average price of a house in Grimsby, and of course an average is not necessarily very informative, is about £145,000. But for one of the bigger houses down, say, towards Humberston, North Thoresby, you can be paying £1 million for a house down there.
Yes.
Down the coast there. Going to have to stop you there, gentlemen. Let's go for a break. Please join us again afterwards. We'll continue talking about housing. Welcome back to Hot Topics. Still with me in the studio, my guests, Councillor Philip Jackson and Chris Carr, discussing housing in North East Lincolnshire. Can I just talk about that donut effect and some of the developments around the edge of the Grimsby Cleethorpes metropolis, as it were? There's a big possible development around Tolbar, opposite Tolbar School, of about 500 homes, shops, a primary school, a pub. It's been proposed at least a couple of years ago, and it's being challenged, resisted. What's the position in the council, Philip, of that development at the moment?
Well, that development in a modified form came before the planning committee in
It's all right, I know you've got a terrible cold.
in December, and was deferred because of highways concerns. Actually, the shops and the pub have been taken out of the proposal now, and I think the proposal now is for about 400 houses. But again, this is development on a greenfield site around the southern arc of the borough, and as well as the highways problems associated with Tolbar roundabout. The planning committee is quite concerned about trying to direct development to the places where it wants to see development rather than necessarily where developers want to develop. So although we're in favour of development, we recognise that we need more houses. Some of them will have to be on greenfield sites. We want those to be on sites that we think are appropriate rather than necessarily the ones that developers would prefer.
Well, a couple of points in there. Is it not incumbent upon the council, then, if there's an infrastructure issue, just to build more infrastructure, make it a bigger roundabout, stick another lane on those access roads?
Well, there is a plan to do that. Some funding has been secured from the Greater Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership to improve Tolbar roundabout, but as you may have seen in the media recently, there was a public meeting about that in New Waltham a while ago, a few days ago, and there's a lot of controversy about that, a lot of concern about how that may or may not work. So the highways and congestion issues associated with that are still a major concern for councillors.
Is that not an element of NIMBYism, though? Not in my backyard. People need houses. People can't sleep out in the open. There are more people than there used to be. There needs to be more houses. Nobody wants the new one at the back of their garden.
Well, yes, that's true, but at the same time, people have got to be able to get around the borough, and we have a situation where, at the moment, the vast majority of planning applications are being approved around the southern arc of North East Lincolnshire, but the jobs and the employment areas are on the northwest side, so people have to travel through the borough to get from the housing to the employment zones, which is where the congestion and highways issues arise.
Chris, you just heard Philip saying that the council wants development to be where the council wants development to be rather than where developers necessarily want development to be. Presumably the developers want development to be where people want to live because they want to develop in places people want to buy. It must be a bit frustrating that your hopes are frustrated by council fiat.
It is, and we talk about highways issues, but it's not new homes that cause highways issues, it's transport. But we always talk about don't build any more new homes, it congests the town. Well, there's nothing saying, can we reduce the amount of people coming into town with a car? We seem to get blamed for everything, no matter what happens. The local developers, or any developer, will get blamed for any issue there is in the town. We've got to build where people want to live, but we also got to encourage. For Tolbar Roundabout, for example, is people commuting in to North East Lincolnshire from East Lindsey to work. So if we gave them decent homes in North East Lincolnshire, that wouldn't be an issue. Why are the people migrating and living outside the borough? We need to make North East Lincolnshire a more desirable place so people actually stay here, so the commuting is not an issue.
I mean, I think that's right, but I think at the same time it's perhaps a bit naive to believe that people are going to stop commuting in from Lincolnshire just because more homes are available. I mean, the new local plan, draft new local plan, is talking about the possibility of 8,800 new jobs in North East Lincolnshire. around the renewables industry, etc., and ports and logistics between now and 2032. And you know, that in itself is going to require at least another 10,000 houses. So you know, those extra jobs themselves, or people taking those extra jobs themselves, are going to take up much of the new housing.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment, and the changing demographic of North East Lincolnshire, and renewable energy and of course ships and infrastructure will be making a difference to that as well. But just to go back to that point, is it the council, I mean, you're a Conservative, Philip.
I am, yes.
Is it the council's role, the state, organ of the state as it is, to tell people where they should live, when the market would suggest they want to live in place A, with even if it's green, rather than a brownfield site, and the authority of the state, as it were, tells no, you will not. I am Big Brother, and you will live where I wish you to live, because it, and you'll be happier for it as well, because this is how the transport links work. You'll live where we tell you to, and you'll enjoy it.
Well, no, there's a balance with these things, and generally,
it's a very unconservative
generally
point of view.
speaking, as a Conservative, I'm in favour of development, and I want to see North East Lincolnshire thrive and see redevelopment and regeneration. I think, in fairness, all elected members on the authority from all parties want to see that. But again, there's got to be a balance as well, because you know, we're under pressure as councillors from our electorate. Certainly in areas like Waltham and Humberston and New Waltham, they feel that there's enough housing in those areas already in relation to the
residents there
in
already.
relation to the amount of infrastructure which is in place, and you know, there's a great deal of concern
That's the
that you can
residents
build everything.
who are there already feel that there are enough people there. If you took a poll of them again, having allowed new people to move there, then the shift in opinion might be different in a larger demographic once there and enjoying those places.
Yes, I accept that, but at the same time, you know, we as councillors have got to reflect the views of our electorates and our wards, whilst at the same time trying to balance the regeneration and improvement needs of the borough as a whole. So, you know, it's not always black or white in terms of the approach to these things when you're a councillor or when you're in a particular political party.
You bring in the politics there quite rightly, and just one further thing on this. Is there a political aspect to this, that if there were changes in population and demographic, some wards becoming much bigger, for instance, or ward boundaries having to be changed with the changing population, what sort of political difference would that make to the complexion of the council?
I mean, I think it's impossible to say at the moment, because you know, we will probably end up having to go for some sort of new boundaries for the authority if we increase the population by a large amount. So I think it's impossible to say what the potential political implications might be.
Chris, if I could just ask you a completely different angle here. What is the development, or is the building industry in Cleethorpes, in Grimsby, in North East Lincolnshire as a whole, in the region as a whole, are you thriving?
We're trying to be, yeah. I mean, one of the other hats I wear is I'm the chairman of the Grimsby District Builders Association, so I represent the companies like Sidon Homes, Kegar Homes, John Collis Group, and some other larger builders in the area. And yeah, we speak to our members, and we are thriving. We don't seem to have many national house builders come into North East Lincolnshire. They don't seem to make it work where we seem to do it. But yeah, people want to live in the area. It's a desirable area to live, and it's only going to get better.
What makes it so desirable?
We don't have any problems. I mean, I work a lot in London, and you go to these other and the bigger cities, and you know, we have a lot of problems. We don't have any problems. We've got the countryside right on his doorstep. You've got award-winning beaches. You've got the places like the pier now, Cleethorpes seafront, with all the streets down around there with the new boutique kind of shops in there. It's a really desirable place. We don't understand what a great place we live in.
Well, I think Chris is right. I think North East Lincolnshire as a whole has an unjustifiably bad reputation nationally. I think we need to do more to talk up the area and improve the area, bringing more facilities and more development and regeneration.
I've been calling Cleethorpes the pearl of the Humber Riviera for years, and people think I'm mocking, and I'm absolutely not. Chris, what is the greatest frustration presented to you by the law, by government, by the process in completing your endeavours?
Planning has become a lot better than it used to be, but there's still the issue where we can do a pre-application for a site, for say 100-unit site. We can spend up to a year doing pre-application meetings with council officers and with highways people, have an agreement on how this site is going to be developed, how it looks, how it feels, how sustainable it is, the flood risk and everything else. Then we go to a planning committee, and then we're in the lap of the lords with with the councillors, and we have, the planning committee can just turn around and say we don't like it, which is frustrating when we've spent a year with the officers working on the applications.
Philip, I can't hold you responsible for council procedure, but why does it take so long? This seems like nonsense.
I think probably what Chris is referring to there are the concerns about some of the decisions that are made, rather than necessarily about the time it takes. But again, I think a lot of it is around the pressure that councils are under from their electorate. And I mean, there have been quite a number of substantial applications which have been approved by the planning committee as well. It's not all bad news. I mean, for example, in my ward in Cheapside, a development which Chris himself brought to the planning committee for a substantial number of new houses in Cheapside sailed through the planning committee because there'd been such fantastic public consultation. Parish council was in favour and the planning committee unanimously approved it. And we've recently seen 250 new homes approved in Healing as well. So, it's not all of these major developments get turned down. It swings and roundabouts,
what sort of ratio
really.
is it there? I mean, how often do you say yes compared to how often you say no?
I don't know offhand. I would say we probably say yes half to 2/3 of the time, and then quite often these things go to appeal and sometimes we lose the appeal, so the developer wins in that situation.
And that's an appeal to a national authority?
To the planning inspectorate, yes.
Planning inspectorate. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll have to stop there for a moment. We'll come back and talk more in a moment. Please join us then. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm still with Chris Carr, Joint Managing Director of Carr & Carr Builders in Cleethorpes, and Philip Jackson, Conservative leader on North East Lincolnshire Council and councillor for the Waltham ward. We're talking about housing. We were assuming that there's a demand for housing in North East Lincolnshire, but I've got a few figures here from a recent Centre for Cities report going up to, their latest figures are up to 2013, so it's about 18 months out of date. But that in the 10 years before that, Grimsby lost 5,000 jobs. The population growth was only 0.1%, that's about 1,400 more people in those 10 years. The house prices in those 10 years up to 2013 went up by only 1.5%. Do we need more houses? The population isn't growing, there doesn't seem to be a great demand. If anything, Grimsby's population is static and you don't need houses unless you have population. Chris?
You say there's no demand. We don't just build houses.
I'm asking, I'm not saying.
I'm just saying, we don't build houses unless there is a demand. We don't. If we can't sell them, we won't build them. There is a demand. People live here. It's a desirable area to live. I said the work is coming in from the renewable sector. What we need to do is to get transition. We need to get more younger people onto the housing ladder to generate so they can move into the smaller houses to make people move up, and likewise the other way around with people who retire, moving from the big 4-bedroom detached houses in the Walthams, Humberstons back into kind of the bungalows or the apartments. And so we need a huge transfer of houses, and we need new ones to support that as well.
I mean, there's a demographics issue around smaller families, which even if the population was to remain stable, there's a demand for increased numbers of houses because families are generally becoming smaller. But I think
so there's an increased number of smaller houses then. If you have fewer children, you need fewer
you can have a
bedrooms.
debate about whether the houses are necessarily smaller, but that would perhaps tend to suggest that. But I think certainly during the recession there was a loss of demand for housing, and I think certainly as far as councils are concerned, we get very frustrated when planning applications are approved for developments and then no work starts on those developments, or they're built out very slowly. And a classic case is the Scartho Top development in Grimsby, which received outline planning permission almost 30 years ago for about 2,100 properties, but only about half of those have been built in 30 years, and it's expected to be at least another 10 or 11 years before the rest of the site is built out. So I mean that's quite frustrating for.
Why aren't you building more at Scartho Top?
Well, there's many reasons. One, there is limited market. People want to live up on Scartho Top, but there's an unrealistic approach to development. A 2,000 unit site will deliver you 40 new houses a year. If you build 2 developers on there, so you put a Barratt's and a Persimmons, 2 national house builders on there, you'll get 60. You don't get 80. And people do not get the hang of this. And we're working with the government on some other work I do, and to actually come around and say we need small more smaller sites to deliver, because that will give you the bigger numbers, not the big sites. And the Scatho Top was never deliverable on the sites, on the numbers they said. We went to buy it, purchase it with a land company that we were dealing with. And we went up there, met the council and the owners, and we said we could only build probably 80 to 90 a year. They said they wouldn't sell it on that grounds, that we couldn't do it. And over the 10-year, 15-year period, it's worked out almost within 10 units of what we said it would deliver. We knew from day one it would deliver only that amount. The National House Builders came in and said, oh, no, we can deliver far more. We can't, not in this area. 40 units per development site a year, and that's maximum. Usually they're only 20 to 15.
Understandable.
But over the last couple of years, for example, there's been well over 2,000 properties approved in Humberston and New Waltham, and hardly a brick has been laid yet on those. You know, so there is an issue about how quickly these sites get developed, and if we're not careful, the whole of the southern arc of northeast Lincolnshire will just be one huge building site if we don't make progress with some of these developments.
But your problem there, Philip, is again, you give them planning permission to people who are not developers, which you have to do. It's part of the process. But if a developer buys a land, he tends to deliver it. The people with the big sites we're talking about were not housing developers that bought the land. There were speculative farmers who put the land through. We can't be held responsible for that. Unless they put them on the market at a reasonable price and so we can deliver a unit on there, we're not going to buy. So what there should be is a deliverability clause almost, that if you can't deliver it and prove deliverability, then you shouldn't allow planning.
No, I accept that, and it isn't always a developer's fault. As Chris quite rightly says, there has been a lot of speculative planning applications put in. But because of the planning process, we have to accept those.
Why does the council give planning permission on a speculative basis then? I mean,
well, because you know, the planning rules and regulations are quite restrictive.
And are not the planning rules and regulations made by the council?
Well, no, most of them actually are made by central government.
They're parliamentary.
Yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, we do have a very strict national set of planning legislation and guidelines that we have to adhere to, and you know, part of that is this difficulty in controlling the development of individual sites.
But the other thing as well, Hugh, on that, I can come on it. When you get planning approval at the planning committee, people assume you can start building the next day, and it's averaging between a year and 18 months to get all your conditions lifted, to get your Section 106 signed off by the council.
You're being a bit technical there. What's a Section 106?
Section 106 is the contributions we give. We gave an amount for schooling, we give an amount for highways, our social housing, to open spaces, to playgrounds. You can list the whole thing that a developer has to give as a contribution to the community. This is all legal documents we have to sign, agree. You know, for example, open space, we have to agree a 10-year maintenance contract on it, so we have to sign up a contract to maintain it. All this has to be done after planning's approved. And the conditions, you can have 20, 30 conditions on an application. You have to come up with the full highways drawings, full drainage drawings, ecological, archaeological, all these different agreements. And you have to have all them lifted before you can start on site. So when we get an approval at a planning committee, it would be a year to 18 months before we can build.
It sounds like an absolute bureaucratic nightmare.
It's horrendous.
Why is this, Philip? I mean, again, I'm holding you responsible for 100 years of government tradition here and bureaucracy, but I don't think Christopher Wren or Donatello ever had to face conditions like this before they could get their buildings built.
No, there's no doubt that life in general has become more complex and bureaucratic in recent years, and the planning process reflects that. And again, there are a lot of national rules and regulations which local authorities have to meet. But I think, you know, where we can, local planning authorities ought to try to make the process as simple as possible. But it's not always that easy to do that, unfortunately.
But still, you're requiring, from what Chris has just been saying, that when a developer builds a development, they must make a contribution to schools, to infrastructure, to whatever other services are required there. Why? Because surely the people who move in there will then come in and pay their taxes, pay their rates, pay their community tax, their council tax, and that's how councils are supposed to raise the money to provide money for schools and for all those other services. Why would you get the developer to pay for that when we pay for our schools by being taxed and then sending our children off to go and enjoy them?
Well, probably in reality we couldn't raise sufficient cash through council tax to be able to do all those sort of things. So we do have to ask developers to make a contribution towards those sort of things, but it is a relatively small contribution compared to the overall cost of them, probably around 10% of the overall cost. The rest of it, as you rightly say, does come from council tax, it comes from the council's capital programme, comes from government grants. So it's a relatively small contribution that developers are making.
You say you ask us for it. Can we say no?
Well, that's part of the negotiation process, isn't it? And
We have to give it.
and talking about the sustainability and feasibility of a particular site, and the council is supposed to be flexible in terms of the way if you can demonstrate that a site wouldn't be feasible with these additional costs associated with it, you know, those can be waived, and there have been cases where that's happened.
Yes, a tax is never really something that's politely asked for, is it?
No, and we get taxed. I mean, you don't get McDonald's paying a health tax, or you don't get car industry paying another tax for, you know, we seem to get taxed on everything. We seem to be an industry, it's the cash cow. The government are cutting down on delivering to local authorities the funding, which I do feel, you know, for the local authorities. The developer becomes the next one there. You want housing, and remember, housing is a necessity. A car's not a necessity. All these other things are not necessity. Housing, decent homes for everybody is a necessity.
Well, that's if we take that to national politics a little bit, Philip, as you're a Conservative. When the when the coalition government came in 5 years ago, they promised that they'd build 1 million new homes. They've only managed to build 457,000 new homes or something like that. But they are encouraging this industry. Is it because, as Chris says, they want to milk the cash cow?
Well, I think the fact that they haven't built as many homes as they hoped just shows what a major issue this is nationally, and how intractable it is to make sure we get the amount of housing that we need. It's been a problem now for well over a generation in terms of not building enough housing. But I don't think it's a question of milking the cash cow. I think it's a question of, you know, wanting to try to get the housing we need, but not quite knowing exactly how we need to go about doing it.
Not quite. I'm sure there's somebody at Conservative Central Office or in Whitehall who's trying to work out that plan and who does know how to do it.
Well, I mean,
again, I know I'm holding you personally accountable for
parties of all political persuasions have been struggling to build enough housing over the last 25 years or so, and you know, the recent Conservative government's performance has been better than the previous Labour government's, but it is a difficult problem to resolve.
Okay, those figures I gave for the house prices rising a moment ago, of course, over 10 years included over the massive slump of 2007, which slightly distorts it. And I think those house prices in North East Lincolnshire are now just about recovering to the place that they were in 2007. And that's what I want to talk about in the final part of the programme. Please join us again, and we'll talk about that. Welcome back to this final part of Hot Topic, where we're discussing housing in North East Lincolnshire with my guests, Chris Carr from Cleethorpes and Councillor Philip Jackson from North East Lincolnshire Council, leader of the Conservatives there. The prices of houses have been distorted massively by the global economic mess that we inherited in 2007-2008, which created in North East Lincolnshire as static a house price situation as it was everywhere else. Now, this year, I've got a little moment here from Andy Otley of Jackson, Green and Preston, a Grimsby estate agents, who said that the wind energy sector has brought in business, whether for renting or buying. How many of those will stay remains to be seen. Can we assume that the renewable energy sector is going to create a greater demand for housing, for people, for population in North East Lincolnshire? Chris, perhaps I'll go to you first.
It will. I think that at the moment, most of the people that come into work in the area are renting, which is still because they're still finding their feet around the areas. Most of them, actually, when we speak to some of these people, actually prefer to commute in from Leeds or Lincoln than actually to live in the area.
Well, why? Because we've already discussed how wonderful it is around North East Lincolnshire, and there's no doubt about that. Why don't they know that?
A lot of the Europeans, the Scandinavians, live in the town centres. They don't like living in the countryside. And when we speak to some of the people there, they just say that the town centre still needs, there's no kind of atmosphere, they still need to have a nighttime economy, which we've just talked about, you know, earlier on. Eventually people will have to move here. They can't keep commuting in. There will be a demand for people to live. But the same again, you're talking about different skills. The people that are moving in are going to be quite high paid. Will they want to live in you know, some of the East Marsh and West Marsh areas? Probably not. So we need to be aware that they might want to live in the suburbs if they can't get a town centre regeneration. Central Cleethorpes housing, I think, would be ideal as well. There'll be a demand for that.
I mean, there's no doubt that Cleethorpes is a more popular place to live and to buy housing than Grimsby, and that's reflected in local property prices, and Cleethorpes has been regenerated much more effectively than Grimsby. There's still a lot of work to do in Grimsby to bring on regeneration. But I don't think we can rely just on the renewables industry, and in fact the new local plan doesn't do that. I mean, we still need to make sure that we focus on North East Lincolnshire's other key industries like food processing, chemicals and ports and logistics. You know, we need to remember that we've got the largest port complex by tonnage in the country.
400 ports.
Well, no, just with Immingham and Grimsby actually, in terms of tonnage, and we need to remember that. And there's a huge amount of redevelopment work going on at the moment with the new A160 link road into the docks at Immingham to ensure that we can develop the docks and the ports and logistics as much as possible.
Chris, I just want to take up that point that you said that the people don't think there's a sufficient... I'm an enthusiastic participant in the nightlife of Grimsby. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. What do these Scandinavians want? Do they want saunas in the pubs? Or?
No, I think it's the fear factor. We're still having a problem. The perception it's not very safe to go out in the centre of Grimsby at the moment. We think that'll change if we... This is why we need a nighttime economy. We need the multiplex cinema at the end of the Freshney shopping centre. We need to transform the area of used to be the Travis Perkins on the docks, on Alexander Docks. We need to be able to turn that into somewhere that people want to visit at night, whether it'll be a leisure, tourism, I'm not really sure. But we need some of these areas so then people want to stay after work. We've got some professional people. The council have moved most of their officers back into working in the centre of Grimsby, where they should be. You know, Wilkin Grace Chapman.
Move last year from the Cleethorpes office, wasn't
Well, not just the Cleethorpes. They were in something like 97 different locations, and now they're consolidated down to 15 or 16. So we are getting the professional people into the town. We just need them to stay there after 5 o'clock till 7, 8 o'clock at night. So have an economy. Then people will start travelling back in again to be part of the kind of the city buzz or the town buzz.
We're talking about the importance of renewable energy, but how do we save all that energy that we've so carefully renewed? What initiatives are you taking to build more sustainable, environmentally friendly, energy-efficient housing?
We have to. Part of building regulations say we have to do it anyway. I mean,
What are we talking about here? Is solar panels on roofs and windmills and insulation?
No, fabric first. We have to get the fabric of the building right first. Your PV panels, your solar panels, air heat source pumps, all of those sort of things are great while they work. They will eventually break down, and we're well aware of putting PV panels on a roof is great for 15 years, 16 years. And then they start failing, and you'll not go up and replace them.
Do they earn their value back in 15 years, though?
Well, but that's the trouble. People have been chasing the tariff and not actually the energy efficiency. You know, it was always about the PV panels that went on originally, was all about chasing the tariff, the big returns you had in it. The more affordable the panels became, the lower the tariff became. They reduced it down. We're now getting good quality panels. But why do you need the panels? But if you have an energy efficient home in the beginning, so it's, you know, it's airtight, it's built, you know, it's built properly.
Well, you need the panels in the hope of the fact that you never have to pay another electricity bill, don't you?
Well, if you don't use a lot of electricity in the first place, by better design, and sustainability and energy efficiency are completely different. You know, sustainability, we need to make sure it's a home for life, that people, if they want to live in a home, that it's designed that they can use it from buying it as a first-time buyer to retire in it.
Well, most of those houses we've been talking about in the centre of Grimsby, the brownfield developments, and also the very beautiful, lovely parts, and you mentioned the Eastern and West Marsh, parts of those, there's lovely architecture, beautiful, there's nothing wrong with those places that a lick of paint wouldn't sort out. But those are mid-19th century houses which have survived perfectly well and are perfectly comfortable and perfectly livable from cradle to grave for several generations. Why would a modern house not have that durability?
Modern house has, but it's got more. You know, the energy efficient of the older houses aren't very energy efficient. I work with a company called the Zero Carbon Hub, and we know about zero carbon homes and energy efficiency. And in the older homes, we really struggle with. The new homes, through design and through better quality builds, you do get a more energy efficient. Say, sustainability is a different issue altogether. You're talking there about putting clotheslines out, putting bike sheds out, making all that sort of, and designing in a sustainable area. You know, the walled villages are sustainable. If you look at big like Waltham, we used to have 2 schools and had planning permission for a 3rd. We're now down to 1 school. And it's because there was insufficient children in the area. That's all about sustainability again. The post office closes, sustainability. It's not always about the physical part of the house, it's about the whole areas.
One of the greater threats to any physical structure around here is flooding, Philip. Have you, or again I hold you responsible for council policy quite unfairly, but has the council and has the Conservative national government, for which policy I do hold you responsible perfectly fairly, have they done enough?
Well, again, with regard to development, there are a lot of fairly strict rules, which I'm sure Chris will be able to tell you about, around whether or not you can build in flood risk areas, and part of the planning process is to do what's called sequential testing to make sure that we're not building in an area with flood risk if we could build somewhere else, and that becomes another one of the rather frustrating restrictions of the planning process on occasions. So there are already quite strict controls around where you can build housing, and then of course there are flood mitigation measures which have to be built into properties as well, where there is deemed to be some flood risk. So we have, for example, in Grimsby given planning permission for a few houses here and there on odd sites in areas where we know there's a relatively high flood risk, but we have had to build in flood mitigation measures, or developers have had to put flood mitigation measures in. And again, the Environment Agency has a very tight oversight of this as well, and they will step in and object to a planning application if they think that the local authority isn't taking its flood risk responsibilities properly.
Can I just check that the national flood policy, which is enormously expensive, the government's putting loads and loads of money into it, and it seems, just to the events of the last month or so, not enough, but there's a sort of limit to how much you can spend on mitigating an act of God, as it were. But in the rest of the country, the flood is caused by, it comes from above. It's rainfall, and it's caused by rivers bursting their banks as they make their way to the sea. Here, the flooding is much more likely to come from the sea. We don't worry about the rainfall so much as the high tides. If we get the rainfall, the high tides, and high pressure on the North Sea at spring tides, that's when we have a worry. Our circumstances and risk of flooding are different from the rest of the country. Is that blanket one policy helpful to us?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. That is, again, one of the problems with trying to build on sites in the old part of Grimsby and Cleethorpes. When you get out to the suburbs, of course, there isn't that potential coastal flooding risk, tidal flooding risk, which you talked about. But the flood defences have recently been improved along the Humber Bank in Grimsby, around the docks, and in Immingham. So there is quite a substantial programme of flood defence investment in North East Lincolnshire. And of course, not only is it important to protect housing where people live, but it's also important to protect all the businesses and industry that we have along the Humber Bank. So they've got a real interest in making sure that's happening.
Chris, why not follow the example of the villagers of Borneo and just build our houses on stilts, like kampons? Is that not a design feature you could think of? Or like the Dutch, build their houses floating on polders?
Well, my daughter lives in Holland, so I know the way they build. But no, what we need to do is we can design houses to emit the flooding. It's not a problem now.
Okay, all right. Gentlemen, both of you, thank you very much. I'm not sure we've covered everything that any of us wanted to, but I think we've covered enough. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
That's it for a Hot Topic for this week. I hope you'll join me again next week for another Hot Topic. Join in the discussion, not the chat, the reasoned discussion on Twitter using the hashtag Hot Topic, one word, double T. Email your views on Hot Topic to news@estuary.tv. And until next week, goodbye.